This is not changing the world overnight, but it's also not a disaster. As my mother probably still says because she hangs on to phrases for decades too long, I can take a chill pill.
Wouldn't it be?
All right, welcome. Diaries of a Mortal Entrepreneur, week 1 in the books. We'll go through all the typical things, but you're going to want to stick around till the end because today we start peeling back the onion a little bit and sharing more about what the goals are, why I'm doing this, and what I'm hoping to get out of it. It'll take a meandering journey to get there, but we will get there. Let's hop right in. Friday, 8 out of 10. Week 1, 7 out of 10 overall. And then let's just recap. Warm-up game, great. Then we did this thing. Instead of introducing a new concept today, I did a top 10 review. I've been doing top 10 things for each day over the course of the first 5 days. And so the 5th day, I just did top 10 things we learned over all 4 days. But they were all covered up. So all of them are covered up 1 to 10. And I say, okay, this time you guys are doing it. Say a topic that you think will be on there and then explain it to the class. And I was like, I can force you to volunteer, but you're going to want to go first because the more that come off the board, the fewer choices you have for what you're going to have to explain to the class. So immediately that that flipped the switch and some of my quieter ones had their hand up and they jumped right in. And this amazing thing happened with the first one to go up. But I'll get into that for the highlight of the day. So that went well. Some of them needed a lot of coaching and support from the rest of the class. But it was nice to see them taking away some of the concepts, understanding them at least at a surface level. Then instead of doing a storytelling exercise, it was Friday, I decided to play Mafia and said, let's try to employ the rules, whoever's the narrator. So let's try and use some of the rules we had and let's discuss how we're using those rules in between rounds. But let's play Mafia. And they liked it. We had a couple cheaters and we had some difficulties staying in character and not letting emotions get the best of us. But they had fun. And also, the Mafia never won. So I'm pretty sure I did something wrong with the setup of the ratio of different characters. We did a film study and worked for a little bit on the project that we're going to be working on next week. So we started brainstorming for it. So that was Friday. So the highlight of the day. This was awesome. So the first kid that goes up for the top 10, I just said, tell a topic and teach it to the class. Tell us about it. Try your best to remember what it's about, what some examples, etc. And so this guy, he goes up to explain a concept, does a good job, picks a concept, explains it, and then says what I like about it, and then starts talking about it like that was one of the things that I had prompted. Obviously, I'm not the first person to come up to this exercise. This guy's just a robot thinking, oh, another teacher wants me to do X, Y, and Z. So it's like, I get that this is commonplace, and I just should have included it in the prompt, but I didn't. And then so when he finished saying what he liked about that particular rule and how it's made him rethink things, he's like, was that everything? And just instinctually, I started responding, no, you didn't actually need to include. And then I stopped myself. I was like, wait a minute. He just included what he liked. I was like almost tearing up. I was like, oh my God, this is working. And then before I gathered myself and was like, no, that sounded great. So then like half the kids ended up doing what they liked because they just thought that was part of the prompt. So that was a hilarious pseudo psychological boost for me. All right, the lesson of the day, it's okay to relax a little bit. I'd been, feeling anxious about it and how it was going to go. And still over the first few days, still just never felt like I had my feet under me. Whereas now I'm like halfway done. This is not changing the world overnight, but it's also not a disaster. As my mother probably still says, because she hangs on to phrases for decades too long, I can take a chill pill. Speaking of my mother, I'm going to kind of take you on a meandering path to the goals of the camp, why it's important, etc. Trust me on this journey. I promise we'll get there in the end. I'm going to take you on a path through the pieces in the world of education that have hit me this week. So first up is education runs in my blood. So my mother's been a professor at the University of Michigan for what feels like my entire life. And then my sister also works in education and is a former teacher. So education runs in the blood, but I didn't know how deep. I was today years old when I found out that my great-great-grandfather was the principal of the only boys' school in Mayavaram. So that was an amazing and cool fact to find out. So, and this guy also happens to be the grandfather to my late grandmother, who my alma mater was one of the most influential positive forces in my life. But that's another story. I won't go down that tangent. But my great-great-grandfather wrote a review of a pamphlet that somehow surfaced in my extended family WhatsApp group. So I'm going to read an excerpt from this. Okay. So he's writing a review of an educational pamphlet in the 1940s. This is 1944. The author is no armchair theorist, but a practical educationist with experience of a manager and schoolmaster behind him. One who has actually seen and known ugly, packed, squalid schoolhouses in the poorest parts of towns. He pleads appealingly for the establishment of the school base for each area of a congested town. It consists of a spacious site in the open country, amidst green pasture under the clear blue vault of heaven with vast airy grounds for playing fields and a large outdoor life. The open ground for games and outdoor life is a vital adjunct, without which the school would only be a prison house. The school is not to be a place where mere dry instruction is imparted, turning out ill or half-educated children who may prove a menace to democracy. It is to be a real center of culture, serving all educational needs, provided with art galleries, swimming pools, workrooms, theater, concert hall, clinics, etc. All this sounds very ambitious indeed, but they point to a great ideal, which we must make every honest endeavor to approach. There are indeed difficulties, but they are overcome by enthusiasm, patience, and goodwill. Poverty is the common excuse, but it will lose much of its point if it is remembered that money spent on education is not wasteful expenditure, but a meritorious investment which will pay eventually and in the long run in more ways than we know of. Wow. I mean, I'm ready to run through a wall for that guy. That was inspiring. And it's crazy. Right words, right time. This is, again, another tangent I won't go down, but just to leave you with this thought. The power of the written word. Something written in 1944. A review of a pamphlet. Does not get more obscure. Surfaces in 2023. 4 generations later. And hits a family member and conveys something profound, illuminating, and insightful. That is crazy to even ponder. I won't go down that road. My next venture is in the educational space. And thinking a lot about what the purpose of education is. The first piece I came across was recommended by a buddy of mine that I used to work with, Jacob Kessner. And he recommended this post about why AI might not be as transformative for education as people think. And it was a great argument, but the salient part for this message was a couple things that struck me. Students attend school to answer 2 questions. Who am I? And how do I do this? Who am I encompasses all kinds of questions about identity, purpose, value, and belonging. It asks, who am I in relation to you, in relation to my community, in relation to grown-ups and systems of power? Maybe you haven't thought about that part of schooling for a long while. Maybe because your own answers to those questions are quite well developed. I hope you can believe me that this question matters enormously to children. Meanwhile, how do I do this is a question about the ideas and tools of a discipline. If you want to understand why AI will fail to transform education, all you need to understand is that for most K-12 students, those 2 questions are the same question. When I raise my hand with the question about how do I do this, I'm also asking the question, who am I? When my classmates or teacher or tutor listen to my ideas about math, when they tell me my ideas are valuable or smart or can be improved, I am learning not just about mathematics, but about myself in relation to other people. So much of that article resonated. That article was a wonderful framing for thinking about the purpose of education for me. So forget all the AI stuff, because I think while it brings up very insightful points, that's not the path to going down today. So the next thing was a post that went viral on Twitter, or X, do I say now, for something called Proof You Can Do Hard Things, an essential piece to your life resume. And this was an article basically about why this guy feels like he can't lie to teenagers about why they need to learn calculus. And eventually he gets to the fact that it proves you can do hard things. Some great quotes. The more hard things you push yourself to do, the more competent you will see yourself to be. The proof you can do hard things is one of the most powerful gifts you can give yourself. And then it goes, I don't particularly care what grades my kids get once they start school, but I do care that they consistently prove to themselves they can do hard things. And if you're not someone who knows they can do hard things, find a way to prove it to yourself. Build a habit, learn a skill, create something, whatever it is that turns your default stance on challenges from that seems hard to I can figure it out. Create proof you can do hard things. So I love so much of the spirit of that article, but I hated the example of calculus. The reason that I found the calculus example to be such a poor representation of a fantastic point about proving that you can do hard things. That's a fantastic point, but the example leading into it, the hook, this is why I'm going to tell them they need to learn calculus, is exactly wrong, okay? Because proof you can do hard things, the problem the author makes. It's pointed out to me by the last piece that we're going to refer to today on Losing My Edge, a newsletter I subscribe to by Paul Millard that is about redefining your relationship with work. And I find him to be a fantastic writer, but also we have a lot of shared identity. But the part that I'll read from this is, the world tries to convince us from an early age that life is hard. Not hard in the sense that Nat Eliason beautifully wrote about this past week, pushing yourself to do things beyond your current level of competence. But hard in the sense that we'll have to spend most of your time doing things you really would rather not do. Boom. That is the point. Doing things you really would rather not do. Because that, if you're saying you want to prove you can do hard things, I got news for you. You can prove you can do hard things learning things you might be interested in. What's the purpose of education? Coming back to the first article, it says, who am I and how do I do this? So the how do I do this question is, what do we need to learn to prepare us for life? And for too long, that question has gone unexamined. We assume that because it's worked, English, math, history, science, those are the groupings, these are the bubbles that we care about when we think of how do I do this? These are the core elements. Within the math bubble, we have this algebra, geometry, calculus roadmap that we lead people down in high school. In English, we have this AP English pipeline that leads you down English literature, history. We have U.S. history, world history. The formats are very predictable through these ideas. But I think by just redefining, re-examining our answer to how do I do this, we can have some transformative changes in terms of how much these things interest the kids that are learning them. If you're interesting more and more kids in the topics they're learning about, the greater chance you have of pulling them towards a great experience as opposed to trying to push them towards it. So that's my hypothesis. And so that comes down to different kind of shifts that I'm thinking about right now. So I think math can easily be shifted, turned on its axis to say, yes, we're going to produce excellence in math, prove we can do hard things, but not down a calculus roadmap, down a statistical and financial roadmap. Everyone will know how to manage their finances, how to make investments, how to make strategic investments, how to understand and read statistics. Everyone will prove they can do hard things along dimensions within axes that are way more applicable to their lives. I'm not denying some kids may really want to be successful in calculus and go down a PhD in math, become a professor. That's possible, but it's not probable. There's a way, I'm guessing, by turning that axis slightly, when you look at the hard things that people like, the hard things that prove you can do hard things that people are also interested in, I have a feeling you can make that circle a lot bigger if you are willing to think critically about the shifts in this process. Similarly for English. Instead of thinking of it as a traditional English and history bucket, we think of this as storytelling and persuasion. Learn the art of telling stories. Learn the art of persuading people. We can use history. This is not abandoning history in English. Please let me be clear on that. Those fit very nicely within that construct. But those constructs make room for new ideas, like looking at YouTube videos, like creating your own stories. This is not a dramatic overhaul, but I believe that those changes could lead to fundamental shifts in the number of students that are interested. So that's what I wanted to experiment with this summer. We're finally come to the point, 20 minutes in. I believe that storytelling is a framework where you might be able to pull people towards what they want to learn, as opposed to pushing them into things that we think they have to learn. And both of those could help them fulfill the purpose of education. That's why my goal for the camp was to see the energy and vibe, to see how much I'm facing a movement towards what I'm sharing, or this is feeling like a very big chore and this is really just another English class. So that's why the vibe energy was something that I'm looking at, and why I was asking about camp versus class, because I'm wondering, everyone brought up great points around class sizes, around the relationships that you form, the ages of the kids, all these things that are critical variables, and kind of thinking through that. But I'm trying to think, how much can I extrapolate the data that I have from this camp, the feeling that I engaged in this experience with a classroom setting. It's a similar age group, so I'm talking about middle and high school kids. So that's the thought process. It's trying to fulfill a question to myself, which is, do you really believe what you're saying? Do you really believe what you're offering can be something fundamentally different and better? Or is it basically just another replica of what's out there? Well, I'll share more about where my thinking is coming out of it in my week 2 recap. So thanks for sticking with me through that process. I know this was longer than usual, but I really enjoyed sharing, and I'll see you next week. I know none of you click the links. It's hard to even ask that. But I'm going to read a little bit more of the Paul Millerd piece on losing my edge, because there were some really good parts about the psychology and kind of the psychological experience that I'm currently going through moving into this next phase. The feeling of losing my edge was a slow process. For me, it started off when I was out of work for several months, recovering from some health challenges at the age of 27. When I returned to work, I didn't care about the same things as everyone else. I could still get the work done, but it took more activation energy. I think this is what people are talking about when they talk about their edge. It's the ability to whip up enough activation energy to get going on something you aren't totally interested in doing, and then even more energy to see the work to completion. When you don't have a boss, you either need to imagine a manager in your head or raise the bar for what you work on. The hard thing about leaving the container of a job is that you aren't just swapping titles. You're embracing a completely different stance towards getting stuff done. You can grind and power through things you think you should be working on, but without a manager to hold you accountable or the inertia of day-to-day jobness, you will eventually burn out if you don't like what you do. The truth, which I was scared to tell anyone, was that I wanted something much more out of life, and in order to find it, I needed to release my grip on the world. Eventually, I did find a new kind of edge, but it wasn't really something I found. Instead, I think it was letting go of the idea that I needed to coerce myself into action to earn my keep in the world. The world tries to convince us from an early age that life is hard. Not hard in the sense that Nat Eliason beautifully wrote about this past week, pushing yourself to do things beyond your current level of competence, but hard in the sense that you will have to spend most of your time doing things you really would rather not do. I have found work that energizes me and that I can keep doing in my own weird way, and so when I see others succeeding in their own weird way too, it's easy to root for them. The upside of losing your edge is realizing that life does not have to be a grind or a competition. On my current path, my only real goal is to keep going. I'd have to blow your nose right as soon as the video starts. Alright, let's go.